Hi everyone, welcome to Experience Kills with me, Richard, and my co-host, Ben.
Hello, Richard, and everyone listening and watching today.
Hi Ben. Right, we're going to talk about a survival horror game called Daymare 1998.
Ooh.
I've enjoyed this game. You haven't had a chance to play it, have you?
I have not, but I've done some reading. I've been looking into it. I was aware of it from a while back when it came out on PC and stuff like that. So, I'm kind of fairly up on what it is. But no, I would like to have played it and given it a go. But to be honest, there's a reason I gave it to you, because survival horror is not really my sort of forte, genre of choice. I generally don't have the patience for it. So I know you're a big fan of the Resi games. I was like, well, there's no one better to look at this, is there, than Richard?
Well, yeah, Resi, Dead Space, that sort of thing is my favourite, I think. I do like that sort of game. I wasn't expecting to enjoy this, but it's actually not bad. So, Daymare 1998. This comes from Invader Studios, which is an Italian developer. And it hangs its hat on harking back to 1990s survival horror tropes. So I think what that really means is it wants to be Resident Evil without quite saying so, and there's a lot in the game that bears that out. The really corny dialogue is the first thing that you notice. That was sort of emblematic of what Resident Evil did back in the day. This does that to a T. I'm not sure whether it's deliberate. I suppose you've got to assume that it is, otherwise it's just really terrible writing. But
yeah, give them the benefit of the doubt on that one, I think. Yeah, I mean, are there Jill sandwiches everywhere you look, basically?
It's that kind of level, yeah, but not so much funny, but just corny, you know. So I'm not sure about that.
So related to the dialogue, then, have you ever played Deadly Premonition from Swery?
Yeah, love that game.
Because that's a very intentionally poorly written game, isn't it? And it's like very much in the know. Do we think we're there, like with this?
You would hope it's intentional, wouldn't you?
Okay.
Yeah, it's not as out there crazy as Deadly Premonition, because that game is insane.
Yes.
But yeah, it is a bit silly. I didn't mind that too much. As I say, that is sort of what it's going for. It wants to sort of reinvent itself as an alternative to Resident Evil, and it kind of does that in how it sets up its tone and its characters. None of them are particularly believable, but they're all, I suppose, characterful. There is something about them that you want to see what they do next, even if it is a bit daft. There are 3 characters in this, and you can play as each of them as the story unfolds. So it's not that you get a choice, you just experience the story from different perspectives as you go through. And you start off as a kind of soldier called Liev. I believe he's some Russian fella. In the tradition of Resident Evil, you start off by going to a secret lab where there's an escaped virus. So not quite a mansion, but very explicitly a lab where biological experiments have gone on, and the place is now full of mutated, zombified doctors who can't quite explain what it is they've unleashed. So you hear them in hurried messages on the radio and on the phone trying to explain to the authorities, oh, there's some sort of virus, I think it affects people's lungs or something. Guys, I think you developed it, so maybe you could be a bit more specific. But so
I'm just a lab assistant, I don't know.
So these guys don't come out of it very well, and this guy Liev goes in with his crew to pull the virus out of the installation and kind of shut it all down, I guess. So that's where you start off, and as the story goes on, you can take on the role of a forest ranger called Samuel. He is on medication to control hallucinations, so that's quite fun. When you find that he's run out of his medication at the very beginning of the game, and for the rest of your experience with him, you're not quite sure whether the zombies that he's seeing are real or imagined, and there's all sorts of hallucinations that go on with him around. So that was a neat touch, I thought. And then there's a helicopter pilot that you control further on, sort of at the midway point of the game, as the story comes together and these characters sort of clash. So yeah, it's an interesting, I suppose, layered narrative. Even if the meat of it isn't that sophisticated, it's interesting that it takes you down different routes. Environmentally as well, there's quite a lot to see. So from that secret lab at the beginning, it delves into more suburban neighbourhoods, so the sort of thing that you might see in Walking Dead, so going house to house and clearing them out and going through streets and trying to escape the hordes. And it's never a case of just finishing them all off. There's not enough bullets to kill them all, so there's quite a lot of dashing between houses, hiding behind cars, and just trying to find a safe way through. So that's interesting. Before going through forests that have a kind of Alan Wake vibe, that's pretty cool. And then there's a really long level in a hospital which has the sort of things that you would imagine, like maternity wards, all that sort of creepy stuff. So it riffs quite a lot on things like Dead Space with that as well, which I suppose in particular is borne out in some of the game mechanics. So you've got not as sophisticated as Dead Space, but there is a system of dismemberment where you can shoot off legs and arms and heads. It doesn't feel quite as precise as Dead Space, where you can actively target those elements. It's more a case of if you use a shotgun, you might blow an arm off, you'll see it like fly off or just be missing on the body. It's kind of a novelty rather than a gameplay mechanic, that. But I suppose more relevant is the HUD, which I found interesting. So there's this pretty cool arm-mounted phone device, which is your screen, that captures all of your inventory, the pickups that you get along the way with different documents to read and refer back to. You know, the usual thing with passwords in them, or combination locks, stuff like that. And obviously your health and all the things that you can combine to recuperate your health or to augment your abilities in some way. So you can increase stamina by taking various drugs and combining those drugs to make them stronger.
Okay.
So there's quite a lot of Dead Space stroke Resident Evil influences in that. One of the things that really stood out in the offensive weapons that you get, there's this really cool reload mechanic, and I can't remember a new reload mechanic since Gears of War came out. But there's something pretty smart in here where you've got empty magazines and you combine those magazines with the bullets that you've got to fill them up, right? But maybe you've got 2 or 3 magazines on the go, and you can either do a quick reload or a slow reload. What a quick reload will do, you just press X and it will immediately discharge the magazine that's in your gun and replace it with a new one, like dead quick. That's why it's called quick reload. But the downside to that is the magazine that you eject is just dropped on the floor, so you've got to go back and find it later, because you're probably not going to be standing around waiting for picking that up while there's enemies coming in at you quickly. So I thought that was cool. And when it's more slow paced, you can just slowly take it out, put a new one in, and then put the other one in your pocket, which obviously takes longer, but has the benefit of you not potentially losing valuable resources. And I have lost 1 or 2 magazines. But I just thought that was a really smart idea.
Yeah, it's really cool.
It's good, isn't it? So some more options in difficult combat situations, which I thought was interesting.
It's a nod to realism you don't usually see in a game with shooting, to be honest, shooting mechanics. So that's actually kind of cool. So I wanted to ask you about your inventory. Do you share stuff between the characters, or are they specific?
No, they're not actually aligned. So every character that you play is coming from a completely different perspective, and they've got their own items.
Cool. No, that's good. That's what I would have hoped for, but I was just wondering if it was going to be gamified. But no, they've stuck to a realism on that as well, which is pretty cool. Yeah. So you mentioned the setting, the time period. I'm curious, what does it do to make you feel like you're playing in 1998?
The promotional material for this will tell you there's loads of references to the 90s in it, and I think for the most part that is X-Files posters everywhere. That poster that Mulder's got of I Want to Believe and there's a UFO, that's in every house that you go in, has got that, and every locker that you open in the hospital has got that. So I don't know whether it's meant to have more and just my game's gone a bit screwy, but whoever developed this game really likes X-Files.
Maybe they couldn't get like the licensing for other stuff. Maybe that's like license free because it's sort of generic. Because I other things I would have thought of, like Jurassic Park references would have been an obvious poster. I remember everybody having Jurassic Park stuff in that time period, but you'd have to get that, wouldn't you, from Amblin? You'd have to get the license to use anything. So
there's alternate versions of things. So there's a Creep Show poster, which isn't called Creep Show, it's called something else.
Right. Okay. Inspired by.
Yeah. So that's basically how it plays out. When it talks about references to the 90s, there are posters dotted around of things that look a bit like things that you will remember.
But that's it. Is it? Like,
yeah.
Well, I mean, are we getting like old tech, like, fax machines and pages and I don't know, like old school mobile phones and like the cars and stuff? Do they look older and like anything else?
No, not really. I mean, the HUD system that I've described, it's fairly modern. So I think when it talks about going back to the 90s, it's really talking about the game style itself and how it wants to resemble something like Resident Evil, how that started out, and it does a pretty good job of it. I was surprised at how much they've put into this development, because it looks like it's from a small studio, and while it doesn't look incredible, they've clearly put quite a lot of work into making it varied and believable in its worlds and its characters. So the zombies themselves, there's quite a lot of character models, there's all sorts of stuff in there, so even with different clothes and depending on where you are, if you're in a hospital you'll see nurses' outfits and doctors' gowns and that sort of thing, and it never feels like you're just taking out the same old members of a horde, they feel like individuals a lot of the time.
Wow, that's impressive, actually. So you don't see a lot of like duplicated character models. That's because I think I've watched some videos of this, and I like you said there, it didn't stand out to me as kind of like a looker by modern standards. When you compare it to, say, the remake of Resident Evil 2, which I think probably, I don't know, equally hurts and hinders this game, because I guess at the same time as this being heavily inspired by RE2, it's also kind of going to benefit from more people being interested in this type of game at the moment, perhaps.
That's it. I mean, I did go into it thinking, well, I'm not sure why this exists, because it's selling itself on the basis that remember those games from the 90s? Look, we've brought it back. Well, Capcom have already done that, guys, and they've done it really well. Yeah. So it's a difficult selling point, but then people who have been on board with the Capcom re-releases, they're probably going to get something out of this as well. I mean, even the puzzles are classic Capcom. Like in the opening level, it's got stuff about Greek mythology and paintings on the wall, and you've got to work out which Greek god is relevant to the particular puzzle. It's even got an old-fashioned typewriter in it in one of the first puzzles. So, it's making those nods really clear.
It's got those strangely incongruous puzzles, which is something I always had an issue with Resident Evil, especially RE2, is that like these bizarrely elaborate, like you said, classically inspired puzzles and in a police station, and you're like, what? Why would this be here? And it sounds like they're doing that, which I kind of love, that they've committed to the concept so heavily. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So I have enjoyed it much more than I thought I would. I think in terms of if I was going to criticise it, I think some of the combat is tricky sometimes. But
so I was going to ask you about combat. Yeah, can you elaborate the combat bit? How does it feel? Does it feel good?
Sometimes feels unfair that enemies will come at you out of corners that you couldn't predict. And while that's understandable, this is a survival horror game, so when you're not given the opportunity to avoid an attack and it takes down 20% of your health and there's not very much around to restore that health, that's frustrating. Sure. So it could maybe do a better job with its enemy placement. What's really difficult is understanding when you're close to finishing an enemy off. But again, that is emblematic of the genre, isn't it? I suppose it's part of the horror to never quite know whether you've eliminated the threat or whether they might get back up. It's exacerbated even further in this because they look like they're going to fall and then they don't. So you might get 3 headshots in and think, right, they're done. but then they will start running at you before you've had a chance to respond. And it's not consistent between enemies, so some enemies will be dropped with 1 shot, others will take 10, and there doesn't seem to be any logic to that.
That's weird. That's
So
a choice.
if you can take that as a feature rather than a frustration, I guess you could do that, because it does add to the uncertainty and the suspense and tension, which is important in this sort of game, but it is quite frustrating at the same time.
So talking of tension and tone and things like that, how well does the game convey, the horror aesthetic, the lighting and music? Maybe we've not touched on that. Sometimes that's very important with the horror experience and sound effects and sound design. Does that come together well to put you in that place, and does it scare you at any times?
I wouldn't say it scares me, because the environments don't feel convincing enough for you to get truly into it. I don't think. I think the visuals, you come to expect that they will be realistic enough to draw you into an environment like this, and it is important that it looks good compared to contemporary releases. So I think it falls down a little on that, but it does make the right moves. So if you think back to Dead Space and what that did with sound design, it got awards and stuff for that, didn't it? Where even when there's nothing to be scared of, you do something dramatic like set off alarms, or some sort of vent system would start blowing out really loud, and you'd think shit, and you'd start running around even though there's nothing in the room, nothing's happened, just a sound effect has gone off. There's bits of that in here as well. So while it doesn't look great or sound particularly great, the effort that's made to make those moments is still there, and it does a reasonable job of that.
Cool. Okay.
Against my initial judgment, I would actually recommend people play this, because I don't think it's that expensive. It comes in under 30 quid. If you are looking for a really cheesy survival action game, then you could do worse than this. It's actually not bad, and there's quite a lot in there that's new and fresh actually to try out that other titles don't do. So middling recommendation from me.
Awesome, man. I'm glad you, on balance, enjoyed it.
Any other questions?
No, man. I think you got it for me.
Cool. We'll leave it there then, and we'll come back to you guys with the next game. But hope you enjoyed that coverage of Daymare 1998, and we'll speak to you again soon. I've been Richard with Ben. We are Experience Kills. You can find us on Twitter at Experience Kills. We've got our website, experiencekills.co.uk. Follow us on YouTube and all the other podcasts providers for future content, and we'll see you next time. Thanks guys.
Bye.